saw's still doing it somewhat. Don't change it. Keep pulling. So the problem with the saws we found, both the 261Cs with the M Tronics, both units they brought in for the class, and the first one they put it down to the delta or choke position. They started it up and let it warm there just a second and made one cut, shut it off, tried to start it back, it wouldn't start. And so I tried to get them to go all the way down, come back up one notch. I tried starting with it in the delta position, still wouldn't work. We ended up having to hold the throttle to get it going. I said, well, gosh, it must have flooded. And then we ran that for just a second. It did the same thing again. It wouldn't start back. And so what I did on it is I kind of went through a quick calibration, just letting it idle in the delta position, and the problem went away. About 2 hours later, the second one, which had been brought in also, it did exactly the same thing. And so I did another calibration on it, and it solved the problem. I started to check it with the calibration of my 362, which was so chain brake on, go to delta, pull, let it idle for 25 seconds, then don't blip the throttle, take your brake off, go directly to high speed for 25 seconds. 25 seconds or so at idle, and then go full speed at 25 seconds or 30 seconds, and it cleared it out, started to work fine. So then I took both of them later, and we ran them through just the idle set, and here that about idling about 90 seconds and probably about 70 seconds, 80 seconds, it started to level out, and then you could shut it off. Unit started up fine. But that was the issue, is that I think it felt like it was flooded from what we usually recognize, but it wasn't a flooded situation. It was actually lean, and so I believe the carburetor, the chip was shutting the carburetor down, thinking that it was flooded. Don't need any more fuel. Don't need any more fuel. So I think it's an issue. I'm going to try to explain a little bit more of it here. Switch off, brake forward, switch off. Okay. Now let's sit there a minute, see if it'll start up. Calibration system on Stihl's M Tronic, and it would also kind of flow over a little bit on Husqvarna's Auto Tune systems. I'm starting to see with a lot of the municipalities, cities and towns and the states, like this week we had two 261Cs with the M Tronic that both saws were almost impossible to start. And what's happening is that they might get it to fire off one time and then you shut it down, and then it's almost like it's flooded, but it's not. What you have to do is you have to open up the throttle trigger like you'd have to do on some older saws, and pull the rope with the throttle open to clean it out. But I think I've come up with kind of the situation that's happening, and I had it happen on my 362 M Tronic, which was one of the earlier versions. I was out in Colorado, and we were probably 9,500 feet or better, and I took it out of the vehicle and started it up, and we did, and then I didn't succeed in getting it started back up. And I then later that day I held the throttle and got it open, and I started to kind of realize that it wasn't really flooded per se, but what was taking place is the electronics was thinking that it was. In other words, if you're higher elevations and the air is thinner, and all of a sudden, let's say you go down to the choke position or the delta position on it, and you pull through, and let's say you shut it down or you load it up with chain brake on or whatever, then that chip thinks that, hey, I've got way too much fuel here, shut back the fuel. And so it more or less shuts down the fuel flow to the carburetor. And so it makes it like a flooded situation. Well, we saw the same thing on two of these 261Cs this week. Kind of loaded them up, trying to start it, or it was already started. They went down to the delta position, the choke position, and then after that it was impossible. So more or less that chip thinks, oh, I've got way too much fuel now. It's flooded. The crankcase has got improper ratio. And you know, internal combustion engine, you're basically shooting for a perfect ratio of 14.7 to 1. So you got to have the air there and then the fuel to create it. And if it's too rich of a mixture, it just starts shutting down immediately. So and it makes it impossible to start it. But what I found on those two units, I think that they had not been calibrated. And if you think about it, you know, if you've got an adjustable carburetor and your dealership or your shop sets it up and they adjust it out for idle and also for high speed, maybe they check it with a tachometer, make sure it's within the design parameters, and then it goes to work. Well, a lot of times whether dealers are setting them up or a lot of times with some of the customers, you know, like the DOTs and stuff, they might go from one area of the state to the next, elevation changes or fuels change or whatever, and you end up with not really recalibrating the carburetor with the electronic system. And so it's either running real lean or it's running real rich. Those two cases, both of them were running rich for some reason. And I've also noticed that most of the time the operators are not getting access to the owner's manual, so they have no idea how to calibrate the chainsaw. So basically they're out there in the field, it's not working very well, and they are very frustrated and upset with the chainsaw. So we started looking at what that was. Well, I had my 362, the older one, had the calibration, if you looked at the manual, was to start it up in the delta position. After you might let it warm up a little bit, shut it down, go to the delta position, and then basically let it idle for 90 seconds, and that would go through the calibration. You shut it off, it goes into memory at that point. And then my newer one that I've got, the owner's manual states that you should take and start it up, let it warm up, then shut it back down, go to the delta position, start it up, let it idle until about 25 seconds. Then you go directly to wide open throttle with the trigger and let it run for another 25 seconds, and then idle down, put the brake on, shut it down, and the carburetor is then calibrated. One thing on both of them that's really important is you can't hit that throttle trigger a second time, or it goes out of the calibration mode. If you went to high speed and you went from an idle where it's in that first 25 seconds. Then you go to the high speed. If you go up and down with the throttle, it goes out of calibration mode. And so you've got to make sure that you think about that. You go immediately to that high speed, and that sets your fuel flow. And so there's a little bit of trick there to it, but really it's much easier than having to adjust the screw adjustable carburetors. It's just that we have to understand how it works and why it works. And so a lot of frustration out there if you don't understand that. And these two today, I tried it both ways, and both of these were units 2 or 3 years old, and it seemed like the 90 seconds, it's a long time to let it sit there and idle at that. Brake is on, it's in the delta position, and more or less just let it sit there, and you'll hear it start off kind of very rich, and then just about 10 seconds before that 90 seconds is up, you'll hear everything kind of level out on it. Then after that, shut it down, and then it starts and works very well after that, so no problems. So it's just a process to go through. Two saws probably hadn't been calibrated since they had come from the dealership, so changing or going to a different area of the state or whatever, they needed to be recalibrated, and nobody had the understanding to do it, and I'm kind of just learning about it myself. So